The last Polaroid. The sound check was supposed to be routine, but Kurt couldn't stop staring at the old man in the third row. He sat perfectly still in the sea of empty red velvet seats, his weathered hands folded carefully in his lap. The venue was one of those old theaters with ornate ceiling moldings and faded gold trim, the kind of place that had seen better days, but still carried echoes of past glory. During sound check, these places always felt haunted, like the ghosts of every performance were still lingering in the air. Kurt adjusted his guitar strap and looked out over the empty seats again. In a few hours, this place would be packed with bodies and sweat and screaming voices. But right now, it was just him, his band, a handful of roadies, and this one old man who seemed to have materialized out of nowhere. "Check, check," Kurt mumbled into the microphone, his voice echoing off the walls. The sound engineer gave him a thumbs up from the booth, but Kurt barely noticed. His attention was fixed on the stranger in row 3. The man couldn't have been more than 60, but he carried himself like someone much older. His gray hair was neatly combed, and he wore a simple button-down shirt that had been pressed but not recently. There was something formal about him, like he'd gotten dressed up for an occasion that nobody else knew about. But it was what he held in his hands that made Kurt's chest tighten. Even from the stage, Kurt could see it was a photograph, a small, square Polaroid, with those characteristic white borders that were already starting to yellow with age. Kurt had seen enough obsessive fans to know the signs. Usually they held newer photos, magazine clippings, or homemade signs. But this looked different. This looked personal. "Hey, Dave," Kurt called to his drummer without taking his eyes off the old man. "You see that guy down there?" Dave looked up from adjusting his kit. "What guy?" "Third row, center, gray shirt." Dave squinted into the audience. "Yeah, I see him. Probably just some venue guy or something." But Kurt knew it wasn't that simple. Venue staff didn't sit in the audience during sound check. They had work to do, places to be. This man was here for a reason. Kurt strummed a few chords, the sound bouncing around the empty theater like a pinball. Usually, he loved this part, the way his guitar sounded in an empty venue, clean and pure without the chaos of a crowd. But today, something felt off. The music felt like it was interrupting something important. The old man hadn't moved. He sat there like a statue, staring at the stage with an intensity that made Kurt uncomfortable. Not the usual fan intensity. This was something deeper, something that felt like grief. Kurt made a decision. He pulled his guitar strap over his head and set the instrument on its stand. "I'll be right back," he told the band, ignoring their confused looks as he walked to the edge of the stage. The theater had one of those old-fashioned orchestra pits, which meant Kurt had to walk around to the side stairs to get to the main floor. The old man never turned to watch him approach. He just kept staring at that photograph, his thumb moving slowly across its surface like he was trying to memorize every detail. Up close, Kurt could see that the man's eyes were red-rimmed, though whether from crying or lack of sleep was hard to tell. His hands, weathered and spotted with age, trembled slightly as they held the photo. "Excuse me," Kurt said softly, not wanting to startle him. "Are you supposed to be in here?" The old man looked up, and Kurt was struck by how much pain was etched into his face. It wasn't fresh pain. This was the kind of hurt that had been carved into someone's features over years, decades even. "I'm sorry," the man said, his voice rough with disuse. "I know I shouldn't be here. I needed to see this place again." Kurt sat down in the seat next to him, the red velvet cushions creaking under his weight. "Again?" The old man nodded, then held out the photograph. "My son played here, 25 years ago. Opening for some band I'd never heard of. It was his first real gig." Kurt took the photo carefully, like it was made of glass. The Polaroid was faded and creased, but the image was still clear enough. It showed a young man, maybe 19 or 20, standing on this very stage with a guitar that looked like it had seen better days. He had long, unwashed hair and wore a flannel shirt that was too big for his skinny frame. Behind him, Kurt could just make out the silhouettes of other musicians. But what struck Kurt most was the expression on the young man's face. Pure, undiluted joy. The kind of happiness that only comes from doing exactly what you're meant to be doing, even if nobody's watching. "What was his name?" Kurt asked, though something in his chest already knew this wasn't going to be a story with a happy ending. "Michael. Mikey." The old man's voice cracked slightly. He was so excited about this gig, talked about it for weeks. I didn't really understand his music. It was all noise to me back then. But he was passionate about it, so I came to watch. Kurt looked at the photo again, studying the young man's face. There was something familiar about him, though Kurt couldn't place what. "He was good," the old man continued. "Raw, maybe, but good. The crowd, all 15 people, they seemed to like what he was doing. After the show, he came up to me, still shaking from adrenaline, and said, 'Dad, this is it. This is what I want to do with my life.'" The word "dad" hit Kurt like a physical blow. He'd been expecting another story about a lost friend or sibling, but somehow this was worse. This was about a father who'd outlived his child. "What happened to him?" Kurt asked, though he already knew the answer would be terrible. The old man was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Car accident. 3 weeks later. Some drunk asshole ran a red light." His voice was matter of fact, like he'd told this story so many times that all the emotion had been wrung out of it. "Mikey was coming home from another gig, had his guitar in the back seat. The paramedics said he died instantly." Kurt felt something heavy settle in his stomach. The photograph suddenly felt impossibly fragile in his hands, like it might crumble to dust if he breathed on it wrong. "I'm sorry," Kurt said, and he meant it. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. "I kept his guitar for a while," the old man continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Couldn't bring myself to play it, but couldn't throw it away either. It just sat in his room, gathering dust. And this photo, this was the only picture I had of him doing what he loved." Kurt looked at the image again, and this time something clicked. The stage setup, the lighting, even the angle of the photo, it all looked familiar because he'd seen it before. Not this exact photo, but others from the same night. "Wait," Kurt said slowly. "What year was this?" 1968, October 15th. Kurt's blood went cold. October 15th, 1968. He knew that date because it was legendary in the local music scene. It was the night that changed everything for a lot of musicians in the area. The night that proved you could make it even if you came from nowhere. "Jesus Christ," Kurt breathed. "The Crocodile Cafe show." The old man looked surprised. "You know about it?" "Know about it?" Kurt laughed, but there was no humor in it. That show is like gospel around here. Every musician in Seattle knows about the Crocodile Cafe show. It's the one that proved you could start from nothing and make something real." Kurt stared at the photo again, and suddenly he understood why the young man looked familiar. He'd heard this story before, but never from this angle, never from the father's perspective. "Your son, Mikey, he was Michael Patterson." The old man's eyes widened. "You know his name?" Kurt felt like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. Michael Patterson was legendary, not famous. He died before he could become famous, but legendary among the people who mattered. Musicians talked about his one performance at the Crocodile Cafe like it was some kind of religious experience. "He's the reason half the bands in this city started playing," Kurt said, his voice filled with something between awe and grief. People still talk about that night, about this kid who came out of nowhere and blew everyone's minds with just a guitar and 15 minutes on stage. The old man was staring at Kurt like he'd just spoken a foreign language. "What?" "Your son is a legend, man. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but there's this whole underground mythology around him. Musicians pass down stories about his performance like folklore. They say he played like he was channeling something divine." Kurt looked at the photo again, but now he was seeing it differently. This wasn't just a snapshot of a young man's first gig. This was documentation of a moment that had rippled through decades, inspiring countless musicians who'd never even known Michael Patterson's name. "I don't understand," the old man said. "He only played one show, and then he was gone." "Sometimes one show is enough," Kurt said quietly. "Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything." He thought about his own journey, about all the small gigs and empty rooms that had led him to this moment. But here was proof that even one performance could matter, could mean something, could outlive the person who gave it. "There's this thing musicians do," Kurt continued, his voice getting stronger. "When we're feeling lost or frustrated or like giving up, we tell each other the story of the kid at the Crocodile Cafe, the one who played like his life depended on it. Even though there were only 15 people watching, we use him as inspiration." The old man was crying now, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. He would have loved that. He always said music was about connection, about reaching people, even just one person. Kurt felt his own eyes burning. Here was Michael Patterson's father carrying around this photo for 25 years, thinking his son had died before he could make an impact, not knowing that his boy had become the kind of inspiration that kept other musicians going when everything felt hopeless. "Can I ask you something?" Kurt said. "Why did you come here today?" The old man wiped his face with a handkerchief that looked like it had seen decades of use. "Today's his birthday. Would have been his 45th. I come here every year, sit in the same seat, look at this photo, and try to remember what his voice sounded like when he sang." The weight of that tradition, of 25 years of solitary birthday vigils, almost broke Kurt's heart. This man had been carrying his grief alone, not knowing that his son's legacy was living on in ways he couldn't imagine. "What was his favorite song?" Kurt asked. "The one he loved to play." The old man smiled for the first time since Kurt had sat down. He wrote this